We have nearly reached the end of the road for Jamal Adams in Seattle. It's been nearly 4 years since the most massive trade in Seahawks history saw them send 2 first-round picks and a third to the Jets for Jamal's services. Since arriving to the Seahawks, we've seen Jamal claim the single-sack season record for a defensive back, while also missing 29 games and counting in 4 years due to injury. Also, throughout this time in Seattle, he's covered in space about as well as a teacup terrier guard dog. This 2023 season, the sacks are long gone, but the coverage issues remain. Occasionally, Jamal will still lay a big hit, followed by a heavy amount of peacocking, but his play on the field has continued to erode across the board, and the team has reached the point where there are better options available to be played. Jamal's lack of success in Seattle is not entirely his fault. Injuries and misuse factor into the equation in a major way. The bottom line is that there is a looming decision regarding Jamal this upcoming offseason, and it will likely spell the end of his time in Seattle. The Seahawks first made the trade for Jamal Adams from a point of at least slight desperation. The team had gotten through training camp and realized they hadn't done enough to bolster their pass rush. As well, the team had swung and missed with Lano Hill and Tedrick Thompson as their safeties of the future. And so, the Hawks decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They snagged Adams to be a foundational piece at the safety position, while they also sought to take advantage of his ability to blitz and help their failing pass rush. The Seahawks brought Jamal in and milked that pass rush ability like an udder that would never run out. He went from blitzing at a 6% rate with the New York Jets to over 13% with the Seahawks in that first year. He got the sack record, but his high blitz rate meant it was taking many inefficient bites at the sack apple to make it happen. Meanwhile, the defense was historically bad in pass defense for most of the season. As the year wore on, the Hawks started to blitz less, and Jamal started to become more beset by injuries. He played only 12 games that year. His best game was the season opener against Atlanta, and it was mostly downhill from there. The next season, in 2021, Jamal was unable to collect a sack in 12 games and was blitzed below his career average rate. He provided minimal impact on a struggling Seattle defense. Again, injuries mounted as the season wore on. His shoulders gave him issues, and now he had 2 constant dislocating fingers instead of just 1. Another issue arose in those first 2 Jamal years that had many Seahawks fans having PTSD flashbacks of Jimmy Graham. Jimmy was a tight end, in name only, and mainly used as a slot wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, who the Seahawks traded for, giving up a first-round pick and Pro Bowl center Max Unger, only to then try and turn Jimmy into an inline tight end. The Seahawks coaches forced Jimmy to do what he was bad at rather than lean into what he did well. With Jamal, it started to feel like Jimmy 2.0. The similarity came from in those first 2 Jamal years, Seattle was far too often playing him at great depth, away from the line of scrimmage. He was also being aligned too often in single high or cover 2 looks, which was not his strength, and more importantly, not how he was used with the New York Jets, where they unleashed Jamal down around the line of scrimmage and let him wreak havoc. So many coverage snaps in those first 2 years. Jamal 40 yards down the field trying aimlessly to handle Julian Edelman or Cooper Kupp or old-ass Deshaun Jackson and giving up big plays all over the place. Seattle's zone-based defense and reluctance to blitz fit Jamal's game like a Lambo trying to speed on I-5 during rush hour traffic. We then get to 2022. And the Seahawks changed to a new defense with the express hope of updating a tired scheme and better maximizing Jamal's talents. In training camp, it already started going sideways for Jamal. He had announced that offseason that his constantly dislocating 2 fingers needed to be fused together. He then promptly re-broke one of those fingers, getting it stuck inside a helmet on a tackle in camp. With a cast on one hand, Jamal still looked ready to shine in 2022 in the new defense. And then in the first quarter of the first game of the season, he suffered a season-ending injury when Russell Wilson spun out of his attempted sack and caused him to plant his foot awkwardly. Jamal's 3rd season was done after 15 total snaps. A furious rehab was undertaken by Jamal this offseason. The injury has cost many a former player their career. Still, hopes were high this season amongst the Seahawks fan base that he could return to form and the Seahawks could start to get some returns from all the draft picks and money they had invested. Sadly, it appears his return from injury has found him diminished and still trying to manage his rehabilitation as he also tries to recapture that old fire on the football field. He has lost some speed, but that could return in time. When watching the film, he will still give you a splashy play here or there, but more often than not, you're seeing a lack of tenacity, play in and play out. Whether taking on blocks or his meekly attempted tackles, there is a wonder by many of the Seahawks faithful if he is truly giving his max effort. The coaching staff has also continued to trust him in deep zone coverage, which has failed, is failing, and will continue to fail in the future if they continue to keep it up. Jamal is best suited in man coverage and best used down in the box. For some reason, the Seahawks coaches force him to this deep role in their zone propensity rather than leaning into what he does best, what he did for the Jets, those good things he did for the Jets that caused them to trade for him in the first place. This video is not meant to be a blame game, but rather explain how ultimately the best approach forward is to move off of Jamal. The Seahawks will have roughly a meager $2 million in cap space available as we enter the offseason. They can cut Adams with a post-June 1st designation and split his dead money up between 2 years, saving roughly $16 million on next year's salary cap. The man's got mangled shoulders, a tender groin, fused fingers, and a surgically repaired knee. He's been fitted to a defense ill-suited to his skill set, and coaches unwilling to use him in his best role for success. Maybe all the injuries have robbed him of some of his love of the game, along with some of his ability, and with it, some of that lack of fight we're seeing on the field, but is readily apparent in multiple outbursts against sideline doctors and snipes at a New York reporter's wife. Maybe he just needs another year to get right. Whatever the reasons, the game-changing player Seahawks fans were promised 4 years ago has never materialized. The best game he's played for Seattle was probably his first one here in 2020. In a part-time role this season, Julian Love, Jamal's backup, has compiled more interceptions than Jamal in his entire time here in Seattle. Both players have the same number of sacks this year, at 0. In fact, it's been 3 years since Jamal had one of those. On 30 pass rush attempts this season, Jamal has 2 quarterback hits and 5 hurries. On just 4 pass rush attempts, Julian has 1 quarterback hit and 1 hurry. Love is the better, more versatile, and cheaper player of the two. There are reasons aplenty to move on from Jamal. Not all are his fault, and this can't be understated enough. But the reality is his release is coming sooner than later. He is rated the 81st best safety by Pro Football Focus, while he's being paid top 5 money for his position. With many holes left still remaining on the roster to fill, the great Jamal Adams experiment can no longer remain on the books. I would love to see him regain the hitch to his giddy-up and return to his old form. The small chance of that happening is just going to have to be risked by somebody else. My name is Brandon Kane. This is the Hawks Nest. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. But beyond all that, don't you ever forget, go Hawks.